You don't want closure. You want relief from abandonment panic. Let that sink in for a moment. Because what you're really aching for isn't some neatly tied bow on a painful chapter. It's not a final conversation, a signed letter, or even a dramatic confrontation. What you're truly seeking, what you're desperately clawing toward in the silence of 3 a.m. is safety, security. The quiet assurance that you are still lovable, even when someone walks away. And that primal ache? That's not weakness. That's your nervous system screaming from the depths of evolutionary memory. That's attachment neuroscience in its rawest, most human form. Now let's journey deep into the neural pathways of longing, the archaic wiring of survival, and the philosophical paradoxes of love and loss that have haunted humanity since Odysseus sailed from Calypso's island with tears in his eyes and a hollow chest. Because this isn't just about breakups, it's about the terror of being left behind in a world that equates connection with worth. It's about how your amygdala, your brain's ancient alarm system, lights up like a wildfire when a text goes unanswered for 3 hours. It's about why ghosting feels like physical pain. And it's about reclaiming your sovereignty when your biology insists you're incomplete without the one who chose to leave. Let's begin with the science, because knowledge is power, and neuroscience is your secret weapon. When someone you're deeply attached to disappears, whether through death, rejection, or cold silence, your brain doesn't register it as mere disappointment. It registers it as a survival threat. MRI studies show that social rejection activates the same regions of the brain as physical injury, the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula. In other words, heartbreak hurts, literally. Evolutionarily speaking, being cast out from the tribe meant almost certain death on the African savanna, so your nervous system, shaped over millions of years, still treats abandonment as mortal peril. This is where attachment theory enters the frame, pioneered by John Bowlby in the mid-20th century, but echoing truths known to the ancients. The Buddha spoke of dukkha, the inherent unsatisfactoriness of clinging. The Stoics warned against making your peace dependent on external forces. And yet, here we are, wired for bond, terrified of rupture. There are 3 primary attachment styles: secure, anxious, and avoidant. And many of us operate in the anxious preoccupied mode when love turns cold. If you're the type who replays conversations, checks their social media obsessively, or writes messages you never send, that's not obsession. That's your attachment system in overdrive, flooding your body with cortisol and adrenaline, trying to solve the perceived threat by reestablishing proximity. You're not crazy. You're biologically desperate. And modern life? It's engineered to amplify this panic. Social media turns absence into a performance. 1 minute they're liking your cousin's vacation photo, the next they're active 2 hours ago with no reply to your vulnerable message. This ambiguity, the limbo of digital silence, is psychological torture. Psychologists call it ambiguous loss, and it's far more destabilizing than clear-cut endings. Why? Because your brain craves resolution to downregulate threat. Without it, you're stuck in a loop of hypervigilance. But here's the radical truth. Closure is a myth. Not the kind of myth that's false, but the kind that's a story we tell ourselves to feel control in chaos. Real emotional resolution doesn't come from the other person validating your pain or explaining their exit. Real relief comes from within, when you rewire your own nervous system to tolerate uncertainty, to hold your own emotional weight, and to trust that your worth isn't contingent on someone staying. Think of the ancient Greeks. They didn't seek closure from the gods. They accepted Moira, fate, and focused on erte, excellence of character. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus wrote, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." 2,000 years later, neuroscience confirms this. Your interpretation of an event, not the event itself, determines your emotional outcome. So how do you actually heal from abandonment panic? First, recognize it for what it is, not a personal failure, but a survival response. Name it. This is my attachment system activating.
Just that act of labeling reduces amygdala reactivity, thanks to your prefrontal cortex stepping in like a wise elder calming a frightened child. And second, practice earned secure attachment. Even if your early relationships were unstable, your brain remains neuroplastic, capable of change. Through consistent self-soothing, therapeutic support, and intentional relationships, you can build what's called earned security. You become your own safe base. You learn to say, I am here for myself, even when others leave. And third, disrupt the fantasy. Abandonment panic often clings to an idealized version of the person who left, especially if the relationship was intermittent, hot and cold, push-pull. This is called trauma bonding, and it's reinforced by dopamine spikes and reconciliation. Your brain confuses intensity with intimacy. Break the spell by writing down the reality, not the dream. List their inconsistencies, their unmet promises, their emotional unavailability. Bring your nervous system back to earth. And fourth, and this is crucial, redirect your longing towards purpose. The ancient Sufi poet Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Your pain isn't just suffering, it's an invitation to deepen your relationship with yourself. Channel that energy into creation. Write, paint, build, mentor, serve. Because nothing heals abandonment like becoming someone others can rely on, not because they need you to stay, but because your presence is a gift. Now let's talk about modern culture's toxic romance myths. We've been sold a story that love is completion, that the one will heal your wounds, and that being chosen is the ultimate validation. But as the philosopher Alain de Botton observes, we often seek romantic partners not for compatibility, but for familiarity, even if that familiarity is pain. We confuse being needed with being loved. We tolerate crumbs because scarcity feels like safety, if that's what you knew as a child. But true love, secure, mature love, doesn't trigger panic. It doesn't leave you guessing. It doesn't require you to shrink or perform. And if someone walks away without regard for your heart, that's not a reflection of your value. It's a revelation of theirs. Here's a real-life example. Sarah, a 32-year-old graphic designer, spent 8 months after her breakup checking her ex's Instagram daily, analyzing his new friendship with a female coworker, drafting messages asking, "Did I not matter?" She felt physically ill when he posted a photo with his dog, the same dog they used to walk together. She wasn't sleeping, she was losing weight. Her therapist helped her realize this wasn't about him, it was about her unhealed fear of being unworthy. Through somatic therapy, she learned to notice the panic rising in her chest, not as truth, but as an old alarm. She created a ritual. When the urge to stalk his profile hit, she'd place a hand on her heart and say, "I am safe, I am enough." Slowly, the neural pathway weakened, the craving diminished, and one day she unfollowed him, not in anger, but in peace. That was her real closure. That's the alchemy we're after, not revenge, not reconciliation, but inner sovereignty. And let's not forget, even spiritual traditions acknowledge this wound. In Tibetan Buddhism, the practice of Tonglen teaches you to breathe in suffering and breathe out compassion, not just for others, but for the abandoned child within you. In Christian mysticism, St. John of the Cross wrote of the dark night of the soul, a necessary dissolution before rebirth. Abandonment, painful as it is, can become the soil for profound self-reclamation. So, if you're listening to this right now, heart heavy, eyes swollen, mind racing with what-ifs, hear this: you are not broken, you are human. Your panic is proof of your capacity to love deeply, but your healing begins the moment you stop outsourcing your peace to someone who chose to leave. You don't need their explanation, you don't need their apology, you don't even need to understand why. What you need is to come home to yourself. And that home is already within you, solid, unshakable, waiting. Because the ultimate antidote to abandonment panic isn't closure from the outside, it's constancy from within. So breathe, ground your feet in the earth, and remember, you were never truly left. You were always whole. Now go build a life so full, so radiant, that the ghost of their absence doesn't even cast a shadow. Because you, yes, you, are enough, exactly as you are. And that is not just hope. That is neuroscience. That is philosophy. That is truth.
Because here's what no one tells you. Healing from abandonment panic isn't a linear path, it's a spiral. You don't get over it and never look back. You circle around the wound again and again, but each time from a higher vantage point, with more compassion, more clarity, more strength. One day you're triggered by a song, a scent, a certain cadence in someone's voice, and the old panic flares like a struck match. But instead of spiraling into despair, you pause. You place your hand on your chest. You whisper, "Ah, there you are. I know this feeling. I've met you before. And I survived." That's not just resilience, that's rewiring. And this rewiring is happening in real time, inside your brain, every time you choose self-regulation over rumination, presence over projection, truth over fantasy. The neuroscientist Dr. Alan Shore calls this right brain to right brain regulation, the idea that we heal not through logic alone, but through felt safety, often first experienced in a therapeutic relationship and then internalized until we become our own safe harbor. But let's be honest, that journey is messy. It's full of false starts, relapses into old patterns, moments where you text them at 2 a.m. after 3 months of silence, heart pounding like a trapped bird. And then the shame crashes in. Why can't I just move on? Here's the liberating truth. You don't need to move on, you need to move through. Through the grief of the future you imagined, through the humiliation of being discarded, through the raw vulnerability of having loved openly in a world that often rewards emotional armor. And in that movement, through, the panic begins to lose its power, not because the pain vanishes, but because your capacity to hold it expands. Like a river carving a canyon, your nervous system learns, I can feel this and I won't be destroyed. Think of the ancient Japanese art of kintsugi, the practice of repairing broken pottery with gold lacquer. The philosophy isn't to hide the break, but to honor it as part of the object's history. The repaired piece becomes more beautiful, more valuable, precisely because it was shattered and mended with care. Your heart is no different. The fractures from abandonment don't disqualify you for love, they deepen your capacity for it, once you stop seeing the cracks as flaws and start seeing them as sacred testimony. Now let's address the elephant in the room. Why does it hurt more when they don't even seem to care? When someone walks away without remorse, without explanation, without looking back, it triggers what psychologists call disenfranchised grief. You're not allowed to mourn openly because to the outside world, it was just a breakup or they weren't even committed. But your nervous system doesn't care about social labels. It registered bond, and bond severed without ceremony feels like betrayal because it is. In tribal times, exile was a death sentence. Today, emotional exile, being treated as disposable, activates that same primal terror. But here's the key shift. You are not in the savannah anymore. You are not dependent on one person or even one community for survival. You have agency. You have voice. You have the power to say, I will not let your indifference define my worth. That declaration isn't just poetic, it's neurobiological rebellion. Every time you choose to feed your soul instead of feeding the fantasy, you weaken the neural pathways of attachment panic and strengthen the circuits of self-trust. You're not suppressing the pain, you're metanolizing it, like grief alchemy. Consider the philosopher Nietzsche, who wrote, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." But he didn't mean brute endurance, he meant transformation through suffering, what the Greeks called pathos, the necessary wound that leads to wisdom. Your abandonment panic isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. It's showing you where you've outsourced your sense of safety. It's pointing you back to the one relationship you can never lose, the one with yourself. And that relationship must be cultivated, not with grand gestures, but with micro moments of fidelity. Fidelity to your boundaries, fidelity to your truth, fidelity to the quiet voice inside that says, this isn't right for me, even when your nervous system screams, just get them back. One powerful practice, create a relational altar. Not a shrine to your ex, but a sacred space where you honor your commitment to yourself.
Light a candle, write a letter to your inner child. I'm here, I won't leave you. Speak it aloud. Let your own voice become the soothing presence you once sought in another. Because the deepest relief doesn't come from their return, it comes from your own presence. And let's not romanticize solitude as punishment. Solitude, when chosen consciously, is sanctuary. The ancient desert fathers and mothers of early Christianity retreated into silence, not to escape the world, but to encounter the divine within. In that stillness, they discovered that God wasn't out there, but within. So too with love. The love you seek outside is already pulsing within you, waiting not to be found, but remembered. Modern attachment research confirms this. People with secure attachment aren't those who never experience loss. They're those who've learned to co-regulate with themselves. They can be alone without feeling abandoned because they've internalized safety. So how do you get there? Start small. When the panic rises, don't flee it with distraction. Sit with it. Breathe into it. Ask it, what do you need me to know? Often the answer is simple. I need to feel safe. And you can offer that safety, not through frantic action, but through stillness, through breath, through the radical act of staying. Stay with yourself. Stay with your pain. Stay with your truth. And over time, the panic will soften, not because the past changes, but because your relationship to it does. You'll begin to see that person not as your savior or your destroyer, but as a mirror. They held up a reflection of your deepest longing and your deepest fear. And in that reflection, you found a part of yourself you'd forgotten, the part that believes love must be earned through performance, availability, or self-erasure. Now you reclaim that part. You hold it gently. You say, you don't have to beg to be loved. You are already worthy, simply because you exist. That is the ultimate relief. Not closure, not revenge, not even reconciliation, but the quiet, unshakable certainty that you are enough, even in the absence of their validation, even in the silence, even in the void. Because the void isn't emptiness, it's space. Space for you to expand, space for you to become. And when you stand fully in your own wholeness, abandonment loses its sting, not because you've forgotten, but because you've remembered who you really are. So keep going, one breath, one choice, one act of self-honoring at a time. The path isn't easy, but it is yours, and you walk it not alone, but accompanied by every version of you who ever dared to love, and every version who is learning, finally, to love yourself. That is the real homecoming. That is true relief. And that, beloved, is where your freedom begins.